So I think I've met most of you, but I'm Monique, occupational therapist with the Outpatient Neurosciences Clinic here. And I've been working with the neuromuscular clientele for the past 5 years. And I've been an occupational therapist for many, many years, over 20 years. Okay, so today I'll give you lots of information. There's lots of different intricacies of the topics I'll cover today. So if you have questions, there's not many of you will have lots of time to answer questions. And take the info as for now and for the future. Question comes along at different stage. With a muscle condition, some people will walk till the end. Some people will need a wheelchair earlier on. So I thought I would cover different aspects, not to scare you, but just as preventive measure. There's different programs, different options out there. So just for good information to have. That's me. Oh, what is occupational therapy? I thought I would read the definition. It's the art and science of enabling engagement in everyday living through occupation, of enabling people to perform the occupation that foster health and well-being, enabling a just and inclusive society so that all people may participate to their potential in the daily occupations of life. So today, we'll look at different ways to make you more independent or enable your occupations. So you'll acquire knowledge on mobility aids for your home and to access the community. We'll look at options to make your home more accessible, and we'll also look at options to access the community, transportation, driving. So there's lots of mobility aids out there, and really today I'm going to cover the ones that are used most often. There's a four-wheel walker, the wheelchair, either manual, power wheelchair. You might have seen people with power wheel assist wheelchair and scooter. So I'll go to the different piece of equipment because there's different funding for each piece of equipment. When do we introduce an equipment instead of another one? So the four-wheel walker. I know Kelly last week touched a little bit on four-wheel walker. So four-wheel walker, lots of people can walk independently. Sometimes the issue comes with a muscle condition that you fatigue quicker or faster. Then to cover a longer distance, a walker might be helpful because it has a seat, right? So usually it will allow people to cover longer distances that without the walker you couldn't cover. So this is when we would introduce a four-wheel walker. If you're at risk of falling, using the walker might prevent you from falling. So again, it's actually, because lots of time people say, well, you know what, if I use a walking aid, no matter what it is, cane, walker, walking stick, will I lose my ability to walk? No. So usually the walking aid, whatever it is, it's to actually make you more independent and safer when it's needed, when it's time. Like if you're falling a lot, then we say, well, maybe it's time to think about it. And it might be a matter of using it wherever, only when you go shopping. It might not be something that you need to use inside your house, right? It might be just for a specific activity that you would have it. I'm thinking somebody who would travel, say, you know what, I'm going to travel, I'm going to have to walk a lot. What should I bring? Cane, walking sticks, or walker? What makes more sense so you can have the trip that you want to have, right? And also, another way with a four-wheel walker, it saves up some energy. So when we're thinking about saving up some energy, because again, we know those muscles are going to fatigue quicker. So by taking rest break, it will allow you to run longer, right? You'll have energy throughout the day instead of struggling to maintain your balance, holding up. Then you have the walker, so you don't have to work as hard to maintain your balance, and you're saving up some energy and you prevent the falls. That's for the four-wheel walker. I mean, you're not all there, and that's totally fine, but it's something to just keep in mind. Manual wheelchair. I put different pictures of wheelchairs. And again, with muscle condition, it doesn't come, for some people, they never get to the wheelchair, and some, get there faster than others, right? The first one and the last one, those are more like traditional wheelchair. with footrest, armrest. The one in the middle, it's slightly slanted. So it's a model that people with spinal cord injury would use more. They're lighter, easier to turn around. But for sure, when you look at manual wheelchair, what I find through experience is if you have a muscle condition and your muscles are weaker, typically to wheel yourself in a manual wheelchair, it's not going to be easy. So usually manual wheelchair are used, just to get from point A to point B, from a spouse or a friend that you want to go to that park that day, the walk is too long, let's use a manual wheelchair just to get you there, right? But wheeling yourself, unless you get a really fancy, very expensive wheelchair, it's not easy. But it's out there. The one that could be an option, it's the power assist wheels. So I don't have a picture of how it looks, but basically within the wheel you have another disc, and when you pull on your wheelchair, it gives you start the pulling, and then it's gonna go by itself, so you don't have to work as hard to pull yourself. And we'll go through funding after. I'll go through funding after, because funding, this is where it gets tricky. If you don't get like the really regular standard wheelchair, then it gets tricky with funding. So this is about manual wheelchair. And also, some people, wait for the manual wheelchair because it's heavier. If you're a person that still drives, then to fold it, put it in the back of your car, unless you have a lift, it's more difficult than just lifting like your four-wheel walker, right? You might have seen those transport chair. So it has only like 4 little wheels, so you can't wheel yourself. But again, like let's say most people that I see that use a transport chair would be people that want to travel somewhere and they just can't walk that distance like within an airport, because it's easy, it's cheap, it's easy to carry, easy to fold and to bring along, right? So transport chair could be an option if you're traveling with somebody, because then you can push yourself. But this is out there. And then you have the power wheelchair. Power wheelchair, I'll go through funding after, but power wheelchair, you'll see there's a good seat. You have like usually better seating in terms of back support, cushion, and you have motor hand control on the side. So with the power wheelchair, again, it's not something, unless you can't walk, pretty much unless you go through a private insurance or MD Canada, unless you're still walking, there's no funded program that's going to fund a power wheelchair. You have to almost be not walking to be eligible through the provincial program to get a power wheelchair. But I set it up out there because for some people, at some point, the power wheelchair, if you can't wheel, that's the tricky part I find with muscle condition, because the manual wheelchair, it's hard to wheel yourself in because you might have some muscle weakness in your arms, right? You can still walk, but not long distance. So what makes sense would be a power wheelchair. But the fact is it's not covered through Alberta Aids to Daily Living unless your walking is very, very limited to just like a standing transfer. But what's the nice thing about the power wheelchair, because I'll show you the scooter after, is with a power wheelchair, you can have, there's 2 options. So you have the recline and the tilting. So if you're somebody who sits a lot or can't tolerate the sitting position too long, with a power wheelchair, you can actually be reclined and or tilted also. So the back support tilts back, and you can also be reclined this way. So it gets the pressure off your bum, like if you're going to be sitting in the wheelchair for a long time. And the other thing, it's the seat elevator. So it actually brings the seat higher up. So if you have like weakness in the legs and getting up from a regular height wheelchair is difficult, with a power wheelchair, you can actually, it raises you up, right? So then to do the standing phase, it's just easier. So that's the big, I'll show you a picture of the scooter after, but that's the big plus of the power wheelchair. But to get one, it's a process. But I'm there, so usually it's going to be done in combination with me, but mainly with an occupational therapist who does wheelchair assessment in the community through home care or through Calgary Aids to Independent Living. They'll do those things. So that's a scooter. You've probably seen a lot around. There's scooters with 4 wheels, there's scooter with 2 wheels. So with the scooter, what you can see it's the standard back and seat cushion compared to the power wheelchair where it's actually, whenever you get a power wheelchair, it's actually prescribed for you. So this is more just regular. And you have not as much as side support for the armrest, and no, let's say you would need trunk support, then it's a little bit more bare. But for lots of people, the scooter is less expensive than the power wheelchair. So sometimes that's a good option if you need to cover distances, but you're not really ready for the power wheelchair. That's going to be cheaper, and you can get something smaller, so sometimes it's easier to get around with. So it's just something to keep in mind. And there's different kinds. There's some with smaller wheels, or if somebody that needed to go outside during the winter, like the red one that has bigger wheels, it's going to be easier to go in the snow with it. The reach for some people can be an issue because you control most in the front, so then the reach can be an issue, but I think they're starting with side driving. You might have tried them they usually have some at the grocery store, or some store they have it. But that could be an option. It's usually we see, if I think that you might qualify for the power wheelchair, we'll go for the power wheelchair. If not, usually scooter could be an option. Sometimes I'll do trial. I'll go to a medical store with my patients to try to see whether it makes sense or not. Because the thing is, if you have trouble getting up from the scooter, then it could be troublesome. It's nice if you have a piece of equipment and you struggle to get on and off of it, then it's not handy. So funding, this is where it can get challenging. So basically, for any equipment, so for what I'm covering today, so for walker and wheelchair, if you have personal benefits, usually with a doctor's prescription, that's what's going to give you better coverage as a rule of thumb. You'll probably need a letter of justification from the occupational therapist or the physiotherapist and the doctors. So that's one option. So with the other funded program, it's the provincial program, Alberta Aids to Daily Living program. So for manual wheelchair, walker, and power wheelchair, you can apply for funding through Alberta Aids to Daily Living. So for a walker, it's straightforward. Manual wheelchair, it's pretty straightforward. So even if you're still walking, you think you need a wheelchair for longer distances, they will cover. You'll be cost share. Usually for most equipment, people are cost share unless your income is really low. But they will cover the wheelchair that's the most basic one. So that's mean the basic wheelchair, like if you want a wheelchair smaller or with carbon fiber, very light, then you'll have to pay the difference. But that, for people, if you have issue with walking long distances, to get a manual wheelchair approved, usually it's pretty straightforward. For the power wheelchair, if you're still walk, this is where it gets tricky. But they will cover, for people that are almost non-walking, Alberta Aids to the Living will consider a power wheelchair, especially if you're still at home. For the power wheelchair, your home needs to be accessible, because within the provincial program, their thinking is, well, if I'm going to provide a power wheelchair, it means I want that person to be more independent inside and outside their home, right? So usually it's a prerequisite that the house is going to be adapted, whether with a ramp or something that you can actually get the power wheelchair into the home. So for assessment, I don't do assessment here, but so Calgary Community Aids to the Independent Living, they do assessment for power wheelchair, manual wheelchair. I do for four-wheel walker. And home care services as well will do it. And if it's a more complex seating power wheelchair assessment, then it would go to the seating clinic. They're located at the Fanning center. And this is, I know it's a lot of info, but it's just nice that you know, right? Because there's so many people sometimes that I see and they've bought something by themselves. They didn't know about programs. I'm like, yeah, let's do a session where you find out what's out there, right? For funding, Muscular Dystrophy Canada also, usually I write quite a bit of letters for funding for scooters. So for scooters through Muscular Dystrophy Canada, it's pretty, if it's a good case, usually they're good at helping with funds to obtain a scooter. The scooter wouldn't be approved through Alberta Aids to Daily Living. And Easter Seal would be another, unless you know like other society or association that would fund, those are the primary ones that we deal with. So, and for the scooter, and even like for the power wheelchair, I'll talk a bit later on, it's like, it's nice to have it, but then if you want to ride it or take it somewhere, how do I do that? That's kind of the second part. Yeah. So that's what I'm going to cover in the next section. Also, I put as resources the Canadian Red Cross. Let's say you're thinking, maybe I should have a walker, maybe, I should have a wheelchair, but I'm not there yet. It's okay. So through the Canadian Red Cross, they're located in the Northeast, they do loan, free loan. Or let's say you have a trip coming up and you think, oh, maybe I should have one just for the trip. Well, then you could go and just have one as a loan, just to try out, see how it is. And some people just go straight to medical vendors. And there's lots also of website vendors. I have a patient that bought scooters just online. I would say it's probably better to try it to make sure you like how it drives and if you can get on and off it, but that's another option. So over there, I put the list of the medical vendors throughout Calgary. So it's there if you want to grab it at the end. And for website vendors, I just wrote website vendors because there's different kind of there's lots of vendors. And there's lots of different kind of scooters, smaller, bigger, higher, lower. So my main advice, if you do decide at some point that you want to get a scooter, if you're with me here, you can call me and we can go shopping together. But if not, make sure it's sturdy, right? So when you get on and off the scooter, it doesn't tip at all. That would be my main thing. And that your positioning is okay, like the reach is not too far. Because I have patients that bought scooter, but it's so far ahead, like where they need to hold the control that they tire in their arms, right? So this is not helpful. So just to keep in mind. Home accessibility. I put that staircase, that's crazy, isn't it? So to access your home, whether you have a walker or even just a cane or walking independently, sometimes stairs can be an issue. There's lots of different ways to adapt a house to make it more accessible. So I'll cover a little bit about ramp, stair lift, porch lift, elevator, and I added wider door frames, so that's an easy one that can be fixed. So ramps, you've seen them everywhere. So that's the easiest way sometimes to get in and out of your house, right? Even if stairs are difficult, having a ramp, if the slope is really subtle, usually people can actually do a ramp. So for the ramp, there's actually a code for the incline of the slope. So it is for every inch high, it needs to be 12-inch long. So this is if you want to wheel yourself up a ramp. Like let's say somebody will push you in a wheelchair, or if you have a motorized wheelchair or scooter, the slope can be a bit steeper, but that's kind of the ideal. But it makes for long ramps sometimes. And if you see on the picture, there's actually a landing. So every time you have a stretch of a ramp of an incline, then if you need to turn, you need a landing and then another piece of ramp. But that's an option. Ramp is an option. And usually they advise up to 30 inches high. So if you have higher than 30 inches to cover, then it's better to look at another option because it makes too much of a long ramp, especially if you have to wheel yourself up that ramp. Probably with a walker, that would be fine. If you're able, you're good with a walk, but if you have to wheel that long, that makes it long. Chairlift. So chairlift or stair lift can be nice if you have stairs. Some people say, well, you know what, I can do the stairs, do I need to move? Not always, right? Sometimes having a chairlift or stair lift installed makes that you can actually go up and down the stairs. And they do now make stair lifts that actually make turns or corners. So that's handy.
They're more expensive.
They're more expensive, of course. And the other one, it's an inclined platform lifts. I don't have a picture, but it's pretty much the same thing, but it's actually a platform that would go over the stairs. So if you were not able to use because the chair lift, the downside of it, if the transfer is getting difficult, getting on and off the chair, you're not sturdy enough, that could be an issue, right? So if a platform lift, that would go over the stairs, and then you can get onto your walker, on the platform lift, or on a wheelchair. That's another option, just to put over the stairs. Porch lift. So you've probably seen them more outside, but it's the same principle. So the square that you see, the white square, it actually goes up and down. So usually it's installed like right beside a staircase, right? Somebody will have like a deck with stairs. So right beside, you would have the porch lift to get you in and out. So you would go up the porch lift on the platform up there, like there's a deck. So then you can actually go in and out. It's open. So usually they like to have it kind of protected from the rain and snow, ideally, just so, because there's electricity involved. So for the functioning of the porch lift, if it can be covered, it will last longer. But that's another good option because it doesn't take much space, right? It's like right beside, instead of a ramp. So if you're thinking like a ramp, but then it's going to take so much space, a porch lift, it's more compact. And of course, the last one would be an elevator, inside elevator. So when you're thinking inside elevator, I think why people don't always get it, it takes space, and also it's more expensive. It's not as expensive as commercial elevator, but it is more expensive. So those, to access in and out of your house, those are the option. And usually, always bring it up earlier on so people have a plan. I say, don't wait till you can't do the stairs to decide that you want to do something, right? So if you have a plan, even if you don't set your plan in place, at least if you have a plan, when time comes that stairs are challenging, then you have a plan. So home adaptations. Little home adaptations can make a huge difference in your mobility within your house. So just widening the door frame, especially if you use like a four-wheel walker, you're knocking yourself on the door frame all the time, or you can get into the bathroom. I don't know why, like bathroom doors, they always make those door frame not as wide. So sometimes that's easy to fix, not always, depending if it's an older house, but that's an easy way sometimes to get a bit more space to move around, right? And it's always a question of safety to do it. And mobility, to have just more place to turn around if you're using the walker, so you don't bump into the door frame. They now sell doors that don't have that bottom lip. It's like door that are frameless at the bottom. So then when you go in and out, especially like for a front door, somebody who has a mobility issue, even just using a four-wheel walker or just even a cane, no matter what, if you don't have that lip, well, again, it's more like a preventing thing, so you don't trip on that little lip, right, with your foot. So that, if people, I always like to advertise it in the sense that if you're going to change your door, might as well get something where you don't get that lip, right? like back in the days, that was like special order, more difficult to get. But now it's pretty like mainstream. Just are little things to keep in mind. Will-in shower. Like if you travel to Europe, over there, the shower is kind of, it's like a one-piece thing, like the bathroom. It's tile everywhere, level floor. So here, it can be done. You just need to find the right contractor who's going to be willing to do it. People, it's nice. They have walk-in shower, but you still have that lip, right? So it's the struggle just to get over that lip. There's water. It's slippery. It's tricky. So again, if you find a good contractor, and I'll give you some tips for that after, to do a will-in shower, or they call it a wet room, that's great, right? Even if you're still walking, because that lip is always the issue. Just having floor that have the same level. So depending on your house, people have done renovation over and over, and you have like those floors that have different level everywhere. Carpet, ceramic, tile, wood floor. And again, it's just that it could be half an inch or an inch, but it's just enough to make you trip. Or if you are using a walker, a wheelchair, it's just giving you a bit of trouble, that little lip, right? So again, like if you're going to do a reno, those are little things that you can try to include within, so it's more accessible. They call it like barrier-free design, accessibility. Lever type hardware, like your door. I talked about that earlier. Doorknob are difficult. So if you have lever handle, if you're going to do some changes, those are easier to open. So for home renovations, there is a funded program. It's called, I'm going to go down this slide, it's called the RAM program, the Residential Access Modification Program. This is through, it's a provincial program. And I wrote the numbers down, but it goes with your income. So if you're a single person, you're eligible if you make less than $36,900. And then if you're a couple, you need to make $46,500 or less to be eligible for that program. If you do qualify, I mean, it is a good program. So their mission is to provide grants to help lower-income Albertans with mobility challenges to modify their homes. So the RAM program will, the grant, so also with this program, you can get 2 lump sum of $7,500 if you qualify within a 10-year period of time.
How much?
It's, you can, $7,500, and they do it in 2 different renovations. Like you couldn't get $15,000 all at once. Let's say you would want to do ramp and floor. Like if the ramp's going to cost $6,000, they'll give you $7,500. But then if you want to do something else, you need to reapply to get the other $7,500. That's how they work. I've had people that have been through the program, and it's a good program, right? It helps people to modify. Usually, I mean, renos is expensive. It's not going to cover everything you want to do, but it's a start, right? Typically, through the ramp program, they will do ramp access, floor leveling floors, widening door frame. They'll do that type of accessibility. So in Calgary, up there, Accessible Housing Calgary, Residential Accessible Design Renovation, that's the RAD program. And I put some sheets. I'll show you the sheet, because this is where I get, I have a sheet on accessible housing. And there's also a sheet, there's 2 sheets on the RAM program. And they also have this sheet. I'll show it to you. That's the sheet on the RAM program. It's out there on the table. And the one that's the RAM program, where you get the funding, it's a provincial program. So if you go on to the government website, it has all the information. The RAD renovations program, this is a great program that I lots of time recommend my patients to go to. I'll explain it to you in a second. So I'll just tell you what it does. I wrote it down because I can't remember by heart. But so the RAD renovation team applies their architectural and barrier-free design expertise to work with clients to assess client and build environment needs, prepare accessible design drawing and construction specifications, and they also facilitate application for the residential access modification program. So basically, if you're going to apply to get some funding through the RAMP program, the government-funded program, you can do it with the help of the RAD program. So they have people that they are actually, I think they call them like architectural designer or technician in design, architecture design. And I worked with them before, so we'll do like a combined home visit. Like if there's an occupational therapist involved with you, we would do a combined visit to see, within your house, what makes sense in terms of, because there's always lots of adaptation or home accessibility that can be done. So we go together and see what makes sense, for that patient, for that person, what's the first thing that would be great that it's done, right? Because if you qualify for the RAMP program, it's not that much money, so you need to decide how you're going to spend that money that makes the most sense, right? So they have that expertise. So usually I would do a home visit with them to see what needs to be more accessible, but then they'll do all the design for you. And they actually have contractors. They deal with contractors all the time, so they can actually manage your project. Like if you have to make your house more barrier-free, they have contractors that they deal. I mean, I don't think they don't have like personal relationship, but they just have contractors that are used to do it, right? Installing porch lift, installing stair lift, making floor level. So that's a nice resources. So the good thing is, even if you make more than what the RAM program dictates, the RAD program in Calgary can still visit with you and help you through the process. So even if you don't qualify for the funding, I touched base with the lady over there, and she said, yeah, you can still send them to me, and then we can help them. Because sometimes it's hard to figure out what's the best option, whether it's a ramp, a porch lift, where should you set it up? Will it give me access to my whole house, half the house? What makes more sense, right? So they are willing to help you even if you don't qualify through the RAM program. So it's a good resources. Or sometimes I have people calling me, oh, do you know contractors? I want to do that renos, but I don't want it. So I usually advise them to call the Calgary Housing of Calgary, because they will have a list. Like I don't have a list of contractors, but because they deal with lots of contractors, they know contractors. It's nothing that AHS endorse, right? But this is just from working word by mouth, just so you know. So that's a good way. If you have no clue where to start, that's a good way to start. So another website that's super good, it's the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. So on that website, I'll show you, I put this copy on the table. So it actually has brochure on different things, how you can actually adapt your house. So it goes over designs, it goes over floor plan, radius, how much space do you need to turn. So those are all free publication. You can download them, or you can ask them to send you a copy. But this is all the numbers. They have like an order number. So you can actually, there's so many publications, like we used to get them by mail from them, but not anymore. You have to print yours. But anyway, it has the contact info. And it's good reading. I was going through it before I made that presentation, and it's still very accurate. I think they probably keep their website. They talk about chair lift, stair lift, porch lift, ramps, kitchen design, bathroom design, height of counters. So this is a good, if you're going to do your own renos, that's a good place to start. So for funding, we talked about the RAM program. And you also can get funding also through Muscular Dystrophy Canada, especially like for porch lift, for stair lift. Usually your occupational therapist or doctor will write a letter of justification why you would benefit of this equipment after an assessment, and then Muscular Dystrophy Canada is good with funding if it deems that you need it, right? And Easter Seal, it's another one. Okay, so now you got whatever you need to get around. Your house is adapted. How am I going to get there? Transportation. Vehicle, straightforward, or adapted vehicle. That's the first one I put on that slide. There's different kind of adapted van out there. Ramp on the side, ramp at the back. Sometimes it's whatever you find. Most of my patients buy adapted van, used van, or a new one. But now they do sell vans that are already adapted with a low floor. So it's typically vans that have a low floor. So your ramp is not too steep to get into the van. And there's new one or there's used one, right? So there's no program that fund adapted van. So there's some van, once you get inside your van, within your wheelchair, if you're still a driver, there are some vans that are adapted that you can actually drive with your van up to the wheel, so you can actually drive while sitting in your wheelchair. So that's an option. Or some other people transfer once they're in their van, but it's a little bit trickier. One thing I didn't put a picture on, but there's also, you might have seen those, it's actually a seat that goes up and down. So you're sitting, let's say like in the passenger seat, and it rotates, lowers yourself to the ground. Or you can sit on it and then it goes up and then rotates you back in the van. It can be nice, but if transfer is an issue, getting up and down a seat, I don't love those, but just because you don't have anything to hold on to, right? So you have to be really good with your transfer in and out. But it's another option. But it's still many $1,000s. So it's always kind of a trade-off, whatever you pick. Hand control, I'll get to a little bit later, but that's going to be in your adapted van. That's something that can be considered, yes. Adapted buses or low-floor buses. So I have even patient in Calgary here, they can use walker with low-floor buses. So the low-floor buses, they actually don't have steps in those. So with a four-wheel walker, sometimes you can actually get in and out of those buses. Access Calgary, that's the handy bus. There's all kind, even like with Access Calgary, sometimes it's actually a car. It could be a bus with a lift at the back. There's different options depending how you transfer. So usually you'll have to have a healthcare professional. You'll have to fill out one section of the application, and either nurse, doctor, occupational therapist, physiotherapist, or social work fill out the other portion. You send your application, and then you have to go through an interview process, and then they decide whether you qualify or not. So it's a 6 to 8 weeks process, I would say. That's their timeline. So that's another good option, but you just have to book it ahead of time, but it costs the same thing as regular transit, so it's a good way to get around. And there's lots of volunteer organizations around Calgary that will drive you around. So I put this guide, there's a few copies. It's called A Guide to Mobility and Independence. So I didn't copy it all because it has 45 pages. But the last 10 pages, it's all different type of transportation services in Calgary and around Calgary. There's some for seniors, there's some for any age, or some that you have to pay, others that you don't. So this is like a great resources. So that booklet was done by the University of Alberta in Edmonton. And they have a website. It's called the Medically At-Risk Drivers Center, the MARD Center. Their mission to enhance the safety and mobility of medically at-risk drivers. and see under, so if you go on, it's really straightforward to find. If you go on their website, it's going to say, so I put underneath, under resources for seniors and family members, you'll have a mobility guide for Calgary and one for Edmonton. And again, this was done, I think, in 2014. So it not be totally accurate, but I thought that was probably the best resources I can come up with if you need like alternative driving. Doesn't mean that you need it all the time, but sometimes it's nice to have like other options, right? If you live in the outskirts of Calgary, there's driver in Okotoks, Airdrie that, you know, they do different things, different options. So that can be handy. And yeah, so that's going to be sitting at the back, and it has in it, the website is there. So it's a good website to look at. So this is for transportation. So either you adapt your vehicle or you get, the other thing also with vehicle, sometimes it's just a matter of sitting in a vehicle also that's a little bit higher up. Like if you have trouble getting off lower surfaces, like lower car, like I'm thinking like a small sports car is going to be really hard to get out of it. But like a SUV, it's kind of, usually it's a good middle ground. Sometimes like a truck's going to be too high. But usually SUV, it's probably the car that if you can still get in and out by yourself would probably be the best height. Truck, if you have to step on a stool or somebody needs to pull you up, not the best. But anyway, so that's transportation. So for all the resources, you can grab the guide. Now, driving. I thought since we're talking about transportation, how to get in and out of the community, I would touch on driving. So driving, I'll show you. So if you go on the Alberta Transportation website, there's a guide that explains that if you have a medical, it's the person's responsibility to disclose their medical condition if it can impact their ability to drive. So here there's a little diagram and it shows every system, right? If your hearing, your vision, your nervous system. So this is good, just good lecture for you. So if you think, if you have a medical condition that may impact your ability to drive, it's your legal responsibility to disclose it to Alberta Transportation. So once this is done, let's say you call them, there's a phone number. You say, yeah, I have this medical condition, I'm driving, I think I'm safe. So usually they will send you by mail a medical exam report form that needs to be filled out by the doctor. Some doctors sometimes will actually charge to fill out that report. But it's actually just to document that, yeah, you know what, you have this medical condition, I think you're fine with this, not fine with this. Once this is sent back to Alberta Transportation, they usually decide, oh, yeah, I think he's safe to drive, not sure, he needs more assessment. So then usually this is when you call me or when you call the occupational therapist. Oh, I got this letter, they say I need to go for a pre-driving assessment, or we never know, you know, what's the answer is going to be. But anyway, once you disclose your medical condition, usually they say either you can drive or you need more assessment. So sometimes if people, especially it gets with their legs, right? If you have leg weakness or if your ankles can press down on the pedal, then this is when we're worried about you driving with your legs. So then another alternative is to go with hand control. So I have a few patients that have actually adapted their vehicle with hand control. But again, to use hand control, it's a process, right? Because you're not supposed to adapt your vehicle without informing them, right? It needs to be actually documented that you're safe to use the hand control and that you're okay to drive with them. So then usually when you call me and say, oh, you know what, I don't think I should be driving with my legs, but my hands are fine, I want to continue driving, we start the process. So there's two options. Car, it's called Community Accessible Rehab. They do pre-driving assessment where they have a car simulator so they can actually see reflexes using the pedal, the brakes. If it's quick enough, they'll do a bit of assessment. And they can try hand control also with you. And also with AMA, they have an instructor. They have a partnership with the Paraplegic Association where they have a car with different hand control that they can actually put on a car. So if you need to do a trial, usually I will actually recommend you to go over there. So then he can actually do a driving test with you with the hand control to see what makes sense for you. So those are the options. So there are options out there for hand control. It's a process. It's not a week thing. It takes time. But then usually you go back to do a road test with your hand control. Then it's documented. So there are options out there. People think, if you have a medical condition, then driving, it's not in the picture anymore. But there's different options for different things. So I thought I would put it out there because I do have questions that come up with hand control. Sometimes I have patients that have been driving with hand control for years without informing Alberta Transportation. But again, it's just that piece. Usually it says, if you're not safe with the brakes or the pedal, then it needs to say, yeah, he's fine using hand. But I put some info out there just for you. So Alberta Transportation website, and then the University of Alberta, that's going to be about all the resources with the mobility guide that you could use around Calgary or outside Calgary. It's a great place for resources. So there's way to get in and out of your house, in and out around town, either with adaptation, different mobility aid. It's just wherever you're at or whatever you're ready for.